Hi, welcome to Bright Hope Creations. I'm Kara, and today is part 4 of creating a scene. So I'm working on our main images today, which is the bunny, of course, and I'm going to start with this rug. So I colored the whole thing in a light R30 and then around the edges with the R32 and then blending that in with the R30. Now I'm coming in with the R35 and putting in the little lines just around those edges where it would be darkest, and then trying to blend that in a bit, and then blend the whole thing in again with the R30. So really trying to show ridges in that rug. I'll use a combination of warm grays and cool grays to put in those shadows as well, and trying to balance out where I have those mushrooms up at the upper right. Now here we're down at the upper left, and here we are down at the lower right, and so that's a nice balance, I think, for those colors, but want to keep them fairly dull. This isn't where our main focus should be. The main focus is the sleeping bunny. So I'm finding, because it's a lightly inked image, I want to figure out where these parts are. So I came through and colored all of the areas that would be that brown in the E40, and now I'm coming in and finding the shadows in E42. So under his feet and under his arms, and where the hat would cast a shadow on his face, and then there in the upper, or the starts of his ears, and then kind of a ridge by his nose and eyes. And now that I have those kind of mapped out, I can come in with a darker one. This is E44, and place in the same areas a darker shadow. Now, even though this bunny is our focus, he's going to be the same colors as our background. So he has the E's and some warm grays, and the way he's going to stand out is that his chair is going to be the contrasting or the brighter color, and so that'll pop him into the focus of our picture. So I keep blending out. So here's the E43, just coming a little bit further from the E44 and a little bit further with the E42. It's such small areas that I don't want it to get lost, all this gradual shading. So I'm just going a little further with each step lighter. I really like that with Copic markers in the E40 family, they have a real variation here. So there's an E40, 41, 42, 43, 44, and then we move up to the 47 and 49. But with a lot of the other colors, they'll skip numbers more so than they do in the 40s. So that's a nice thing about the gray browns, is I can get a real gradual shading like I would with the cool grays or the warm grays, just by stepping up one at a time. Those E40s don't even make my top 50 cut of Copic markers. If I could only have 50, which ones would I choose? I have a video on that. If you want to check that out, I'll put the link in the description below. But it doesn't make the cut because it's gray. And if I only have 50 Copic markers, I would want something more predominantly brown, kind of a yellow brown, like the E21s or the E20s or the E30s. All right, so continuing to just keep blending in this little guy, and it's a slow process. You can see I'm coming in several times, going around in the same way, but each time I blend through, it just blends a little with a little more detail. So giving his little pads on his paws some color, pink color with the R30, and then underneath kind of shading that with the R32 and blending that in with the R30. And then to come in with the E40s again, and this kind of browns them up a bit so that they look like they're part of the ears and the feet rather than just kind of brightly sticking out there. And once those are colored in, I can put a little more definition to the edges, ridges around his ears where the opening can be defined, and it doesn't look like it's so that there looks like there's depth inside that ear. And he's a sleeping bunny. Well, of course he's a sleeping bunny. He worked so hard carving out this burrow. I'd be sleeping too. But he's a sleeping bunny, and so there's no movement. I'm not trying to make him look like he's active in any way with his face, expressions, or anything. So later on, I will put in the details of his nose and eyes and his little mouth, but nothing that's going to really require a lot of shading or depth. Just like to get that little ridge on his face to show that his nose is closer to us than the eyes. But as I finish this up, we have his little belly, and it's a cool gray, and wanted to keep it fairly white, so came in with the colorless blender to soften that out in the middle, and then make sure that I have enough shading, and then warm it up with a warm gray as well. All right, time for the chair. And what I'm going to first do is come around with this G21 and find the darker shadows, but I'm not putting all of my darker shadows in because the chair has a lot of different angles to it, and because it's again lightly inked, I don't want to lose any of those details for when I'm trying to figure out where to put in shadows. So some of the things I didn't color right away because I wanted to make sure I could still see those lines. But where I did decide to come in with that lighter color, I'm now going over with the darker one, the G24, and now the G46 to just get in those darkest areas, kind of help me define where those are. I was debating what color I wanted this chair to be, and so I took some pieces of scrap cardstock in different colors and just kind of laid it over to see what that color would look like, and then kind of stand back and squint my eyes. So the green one out. I didn't want this to necessarily be a Christmas card because a lot of times that green and red indicates that, but I think that the reds are coral enough to say either way, and green and red are opposites on the color wheel, so that kind of works out. Now we've got some orange and yellow in the fire too, but that's just that one's not a decision. That's going to be there because that's the color of fire. So I'm more basing it off of the rug, those mushrooms, and then contrasting that with the chair. So continuing to put in those shadows and blending it up a little bit more each time, and I haven't gone through and colored the whole chair yet because I want the light parts to be very light. So here I come in with my lightest one, and this is the G20, and I will color all the rest of the chair, but you will see that it's not blending very well yet with the G21, And that's all right because we've got a ways to go. And I'm not worried about it blending right away. It'll get there. So now that I have the whole chair kind of mapped out where those shadows are, I can come in with my darkest ones. This is the G28, and really define some of those crevices where the cushion would meet up with the sides of the chair and then back behind the bunny. But for this episode of the series of creating a scene, really showing that adding color, this is the main tool that I use in this scene to show the focal point, is to get this very different color in here than the rest of the scene. The coral colors are kind of the secondary, and this green chair is our prominent color. And since our bunny is a neutral color, because in the wild he needs to be a bit camouflaged, and he would be, but the green chair around him really brings him out, and so it's really color in this scene that brings us to the focus of it. I'm really taking my time with this chair, and you can see at this point it's mostly that light green, the G20, but in the end it will not be. The G20 will really just be the highlights, and this G21 is more the predominant color of the chair, with the shadows being the darker colors. But that G20 really gives a nice kind of glow or highlight around the chair. And some of the places where I have that highlight might not be there because of the way the light source would bounce off of that, but I really want to show the definition of this chair, and I'm not so worried about that. And now, after all this time working through with the different markers, the colors are really smoothing out and blending well together, and there's a nice I'd say a variation between the dark and the light colors in this chair now. Usually when I video myself coloring, I will edit out a lot of the shading. I will just tell you, and then I blended it out with this, and I'll show you a little bit, but I won't show you the entire blending. But because I've been asked to kind of show my whole process, that's what this video series is doing. It's showing every little bit. So if you're getting bored of this chair, just speed it up. So I speak slow enough that you probably would still be able to understand me at twice the speed. But anyway, it's a slow process for me, but I enjoy it. It's relaxing to color, and I don't mind that it takes a while to do a small area. I don't feel like I don't need to get anywhere with this. And at this point, I really don't need to comment through every step of this chair, because you can see it for yourself, the colors and how I'm just working through with the shading. This is actually sped up so that it's twice the speed of my coloring. So you're seeing it 2 times the speed. So I even color slower than this. And the nice thing about alcohol markers is you can keep going over and over and layering them. Now sometimes they can get sticky. If I have to change a nib or something, if a marker gets sticky, it's time to change the nib, because it's just gonna get tacky on the paper, and then it does not blend well after that. So that's something to be careful about. And changing the nib is easy. I do have a video on that, and also refilling markers. If you're interested, I'll link that in the description below. But it's always a good idea to get those refills for markers, because with these sketch markers, refill will refill the marker like 6 times, and it's around the same cost as a new marker. So never buy a new marker. Just get some nibs and get some refill inks. So they're Copic Various is what they're called. Well, the chair is done, and so I'm going to color the bunny's little hat, and he'll have a white ridge or a cuff on his hat, and so I'm going to give that some shadow with the cool grays, and that's going to kind of contrast with his warm gray kind of brown body. And then he'll have a coral colored hat. Kind of keep that consistent in the picture with the other colors. And then this little pom-pom as well on his hat. And I'm just putting in tiny little dots and lines to give that some texture. And then finding places to add the shadow around the ridge of that hat where it would come by his forehead, and then where it would fold a little bit, and then just continuing to put in those little lines and dots to give it a fluffy look of a pom-pom, and darker near him and lighter by the light source. And then with this colorless blender, kind of blending it a little, softening it up where it turns white. And now the main part of his nightcap, finding those shadows closest to him and by the ridge. And it's a small area, but I want to find some ways to show that there's some folds in there so that it's not perfectly smooth all the way across the top. So putting in some lines for that. And here I'm just blending that all together with the R30, and now with the R35 really coming back into those folds and areas that would be the darkest to give it the shadow. And they're tiny little lines, so I put my marker straight up and down to get the tip of that nib on there, and I get a nice thin line that way. I've learned along the way that depending on where I'm holding the marker, whether it's up close for little details or further back on the marker barrel for wider strokes, it really helps in giving some control for the way that I'm using the marker, whether it's a wide flicking motion or it's the tiny flicking motion. It really depends on where I want to put my hand on that barrel. So obviously here it's very close so that I can make these little lines and get those details in there. This is a small area, so I still want to make sure that I have a good contrast, so from light to dark. Now for the legs of the chair, I'm gonna color them all with the E21 and start putting in some shadows with the E23. And so this is that same wood as the table and probably the tree. But I'm just going to skip over some of this so that you really can just see the main shading of these legs and how that would be. This finishes up our main focal image coloring. Tune in for part 5, the finale in the series, to see all the finishing details, including some ink blending and creating dark shadows. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye.